Hi everybody, welcome to Ned Rocks, the Nedcast. Big thanks to my friend Levi for putting together the logo there. Okay, so I just watched this movie called Avengers: Infinity War, and so there was this guy in it named Thanos. Kind of an interesting guy. So his basic idea was that, there's so much suffering in the universe. There's so much suffering because of overpopulation. I mean, the population is so high, and universe-wide, everyone is starving, barely getting enough food to eat. So, simple solution. Kill off half the population. There is a problem, though. Let me get into this. Okay, so if you have let's look at a population growth function. So we're talking about population as a function of time. So the population at time 0 times e to the r t. Very simple. That's the same formula if you know compound interest for continuous compounding, only instead of a population, you're talking about your principal. Also, this is the same equation for radioactive decay. Only instead of having a population growth rate there, you've got a decay constant. But it's the same. It's the same deal. It's shrinking instead of growing, but it's just mathematically you can model it using the same equation. So, okay, so there's a very important quantity if something's growing according to the exponential function, and that's called the doubling time. And so the idea of the doubling time, it's just the inverse of the half-life. So a half-life is a certain length of time that it takes before something can, but for the half-life, a certain length of time, it reduces by half. For the doubling time, in a certain length of time, it will increase, it'll double. Increase by 100%. So how do we figure out what this is? Well, there's a rule called the rule of 70. And so the rule of 70 is just that you take the growth rate. You take 70, divide it by the growth rate, and you'll approximately get the doubling time. So if it's growing at 1% per year, then it'll double in 70 years. Now, so let's suppose that population on Earth is growing at 1% per year. Well, if Thanos kills off half the population, we'll just be right back where we started off in 70 years. So I'm not the first person to think up of this, obviously. This dude named John Scalzi, he wrote the book Red Shirts, but yeah, Red Shirts. Anyway, he tweeted out that if you think about it, Thanos just brought us back to 1969, the year 1969. So it's not that impressive. Which is it's a good point. And one thing though, 1969 was less than 70 years ago. So that means the population growth rate has been a little bit, over the past 50 years, it's been a little bit higher than 1%. Although the population growth rate is going down. So the average growth rate over that 50-year span was higher than 1%, but it's going down and it's below 1% now. Although obviously there's a lot of spatial variation there. I mean, population growth rate is much higher in Africa right now than it is in the rest of the world. The rest of the world is either very low or negative at this point. Anyway, so the doubling time, so one thing that's kind of interesting about the exponential function too. So it's growing, right? And not only is it growing, but the rate at which it's growing is also growing. You know, so how fast is it growing? How fast is the rate at which it's growing? Growing. So, well, the derivative of e to the x is e to the x. So not only is it growing exponentially, but the rate at which it's growing is also growing exponentially. I mean, the rate at which the growth is growing. So yeah, it's also growing exponentially. So it's just, it's really growing there. Anyway, so so I started to think. I was like, well, okay, so how much time would Thanos? What sort of what fraction of the population would Thanos have to wipe out in order to give us a little bit more time? So, so what I did, okay, so let's suppose that you've got one population, so 1 is equal to 1 minus some fraction, whatever fraction you want to kill off, times e. Oh, and you have to pick a growth rate, and 1% I think is a good growth rate, 1% per year, 0.01. Simply because it's not a very high growth rate. Like I said, for the past 50 years, the average has been higher than that. But it's also, it's not. I think it's pretty realistic. And if anything, it's low. Really, if anything, I think it's low. So okay, so what you want to do is you want to solve the function. You want to solve this equation for f, so that you can plug some number into t for whatever whatever you want, and then you can figure out what fraction you have to kill off. So, so first, just divide both sides. Subtract 1 there and multiply by -1. -1 plus 1. Okay, so there you have it. So I plugged in 1,000 years into this equation, because 1,000 years I think is a pretty good round number. So if you want to be able to grow 1% per year for 1,000 years, how long will it be before you're back where you started? Well, I mean, what size? If you want to grow for 1,000 years and be back where you started, how much of the population do you have to kill off? So I ran the numbers, and you have to kill off 99.995% of the population, and that's a lot. So yeah, I mean, this is really what Malthus was trying to get at. Thomas Malthus, the population theorist, I guess you have to say that's what he get known for. But any finite container, if you have a growth rate, even a low growth rate like 1% per year, and you're starting from a very, very low, if you killed off 99.995% of the population, you're starting from a very low population. But after a few thousand years of steady growth, you're going to fill any finite container. It doesn't matter how big it is, the entire world, entire solar system, the entire universe. So, yeah. So, speaking of this, on this subject, the subject of population ethics. So there's a very popular ethical theory. Well, I mean, a lot of people like it, and a lot of people also don't like it. But it's called utilitarianism. And so, utilitarianism. Jeremy Bentham was the one who thought this up. John Stuart Mill wrote a book about it. That's pretty cool stuff. So, anyway. So, basically, the idea behind utilitarianism is that you're trying to maximize this quantity called utility. So, And so, you're trying to maximize it. There's so there's a concept called the mere addition paradox. And so the basic idea behind the mere addition paradox. Okay, so let's suppose that you've got some population like this, and on this you'll have utility on this graph, and on this you'll have the population. Size. So this axis is population size, this axis is utility. Take some population looks like this. Pretty happy, very high utility. Yeah, happy utility. What exactly is utility is also somewhat controversial, but happiness or contentment. Basically just good stuff. And you're trying to maximize. So what you're trying to do, your goal in utilitarianism, is to maximize the area shaded here. The not shaded. I was shaded. Yeah, the area that you're shading here. So maximizing the area, that's your goal. So now the mere addition paradox. So let's suppose that you take this population and you add to it a little smaller population, or no, actually same size population, but a little bit less happy. So now, you're trying to maximize the area here. That's your goal with utilitarianism. So it would seem, because all of these people, this is the same as this, all of these people are just as well off as they were before you added this population. However, when you add this population, you're increasing the total utility. So you think there's no reason not to. These people are just as happy as they were, and these people, they're happy. So you might as well add the population together, and so you end up with a new population that looks kind of like this. Okay, now so here's the interesting part. So let's think about this new population that looks like this, right? Now it's got a higher average utility than this population. Higher average, right? Because if you were to average those two together, this would be higher. And it's got a higher total utility as well. Because if you were to add up the area under that curve, or it would be higher than this population. So might as well evolve your society towards a population that looks like that. Okay. Now, what if you take this population and you add an even smaller, an even less happy population to it? Well, you don't have to be a genius to realize that after you do this enough times, you're going to end up with a population that looks like this. You're going to have a massively large population, but everyone is just going to be barely happy. So a lot of people, this strikes a lot of people as being horrible. They're like, oh no, everyone's barely happy. And so this is actually called the repugnant conclusion, is what they call it, because people find it repugnant. Like, oh, this is the repugnant conclusion. I really don't like this, the mere addition paradox, for a few reasons. One is, it's not really a paradox. It's actually a consequence of the mathematics involved. It's not logically inconsistent or anything. It's just a consequence of the mathematics. The other the other reason I don't like the mere addition paradox is intuitively, a lot of people find the repugnant conclusion repugnant. Hence the name repugnant conclusion. I don't find it I don't find it repugnant. Because, okay, so you've got a very large population. Yeah, their utility isn't that high. But it's still above, it's still positive. It's still above zero. So I don't find it repugnant at all. I mean, you might think, yeah, they don't have an easy life. But, all things considered, they're pretty good. And I honestly think that in the modern world, a lot of people are negative in the world. A lot of people have negative utility. This is something we really ought to work on. A lot of people, all things considered, they don't want to, but, okay, so, the repugnant conclusion, I don't find it just intuitively or viscerally, I don't find it repugnant at all. I actually think it'd be a pretty good life. Yeah, I mean, it'd be a high population, but, whatever. Okay, and so then we're getting to the real issue, though, that I see with the mere addition paradox. I think the most important point here, and that is, it's a false choice. So they're saying that the only way to increase the population is to make people worse off. I don't think that's true. Because, even a very large population on planet Earth, I think could be very happy. Now, granted, they're probably not going to be, they're going to be pretty skinny. They're not going to eat a lot of meat. They're going to be eating, like, grains and beans and stuff. Honestly, I like rice and beans. Red beans and rice, I like. Anyway, you know what else? So, okay, how big of a population can the world support, I mean, so this guy named E.O. Wilson, he's a biologist at Harvard, and he very controversial because he wrote this book called Sociobiology, and very controversial back in the 70s. Basically, the thesis of sociobiology was that our society is influenced by our biology. So a lot of our social behavior is influenced by our biology as humans. So very controversial. I think Stephen Jay Gould pushed back against it and said that, well, no, actually, according to Stephen Jay Gould, things like aggression and war and stuff like that were not a consequence of our biology. Aggression was a consequence of our society. So he was saying, well, we should change our society. We can change our society so that we won't be aggressive anymore. I don't know about that. I don't know. Anyway, but that aside, leaving sociobiology aside, Edward O. Wilson, he published a book, 2002, where he said that the total carrying capacity of the Earth, the total population that the Earth can support, he said was about 10 billion. Now, so that's one number. To be honest, I think that's a little low. I think he made some pretty pessimistic assumptions about crop yields, and he's talking about, okay, so we've got a certain number of hectares of arable land on Earth, and we can grow a certain amount of calories per year, and I think he made some pretty pessimistic assumptions. I think we can get some much higher yields than he says. Now, so the blogger Anatoly Karlin, he's a blogger at the Owens Review. He thinks the number is actually closer to 100 billion. $100 billion. I think that's a much more realistic number. I think that's more in the ballpark of what the human population what the Earth can support at the current level of technology. Now, I will say, though, that the limiting factor, because, to get the amount of yields, the crop yields that we have right now, we use a lot of fertilizer, and nitrogen fertilizer especially is nitrogen we capture out of the air, and we turn it into ammonia, but that takes an immense amount of energy. Its energy is the limiting factor, and I mean right now we're using fossil fuels to produce an ammonia fertilizer. So the real limiting factor, see, right now in our current technological situation, the limiting factor, the sort of the uber resource on planet Earth is energy. Energy is just it. I don't know. I mean, if we found some fantastic source of energy, or maybe if we got out of planet Earth and out into the solar system, because the sun puts out a lot of power. So anyway, but maybe there would be some other limiting factor. Eventually, we'd hit something else. But right now on Earth, the limiting factor is energy. So what I'm saying is, if we had some inexhaustible source of energy, the carrying capacity would be a heck of a lot higher than 100 billion. I don't know what it would be, but it would be a much higher. So anyway, yeah. So 100 billion people. I think that 100 billion people on Earth could be very happy. The limiting factor would be food, so they'd have to eat, beans and rice, and they probably wouldn't be, the obesity would not be epidemic in this society, but I think all things considered, they would be pretty happy. So that's my response to the mirror addition paradox. It is a false choice. Anyway, so yeah, that's basically my thoughts here on population growth, Thanos not going far enough, although ultimately being a fool's errand to try to kill off the population because it will just grow back. So yeah. Okay. So that's the first podcast. If you have any questions, comments, leave a comment, or you can shoot me an email. It's just ned@nedrocks.org. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.